bought the ticket 3 days before the world ended. Not because I wanted to travel, because I wanted to survive. My name is Marcus Vale, and I was a senior data analyst at the Centers for Disease Control. Not a doctor, not a virologist, just a man who spent 11 years reading patterns and numbers that most people never saw. Infection rates, mortality curves, vector mapping. I lived inside the math of disease. And on a Tuesday morning in October, the math told me something that froze the blood in my arms. I was reviewing a flagged data set from a colleague named Dr. Lena Mosier. Lena had been stationed in the Republic of Georgia, tracking an anomalous cluster of encephalitis cases in rural communities along the Kura River Basin. The cases were small, 47 confirmed, 12 fatal. But the transmission curve was unlike anything in our modeling archive. It didn't flatten, it didn't spike and retreat. It climbed in a perfect, relentless geometric line. Every 19.4 hours, confirmed cases doubled. No pathogen on modern record had sustained that replication rate beyond a 72-hour window without burning through its host population. This one wasn't burning out. It was accelerating. I ran the projections 4 times. Each result gave me the same answer, if the curve held. And there was no biological reason it wouldn't. The pathogen would breach continental spread within 6 days. Total infrastructure collapse within 9. I called Lena's satellite phone. She didn't answer. I called again at midnight. A man picked up. He was breathing hard. He said one sentence in broken English before the line dropped. She is biting. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment in Arlington, Virginia, staring at the projection map on my laptop. Red dots bloomed across the Caucasus like cigarette burns on a paper map. By morning, 2 cases had appeared in Istanbul. The CDC's Internal Communication Board flagged them as unrelated. I knew they were lying to themselves. I had 72 hours, maybe less, and I needed a plan that didn't depend on walls, because walls only work until the people inside them start turning. That's when I thought of the train. The Amtrak Capital Limited runs from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. But I wasn't interested in Amtrak. I was interested in the Continental Vault, a privately operated luxury rail experience that runs a modified route from New York Penn Station through the Northern Corridor, across the Great Lakes region, and into the Canadian border zone near Niagara. 16 cars, self-contained water recycling, diesel reserves for 3,200 miles, a kitchen stocked for 5-star dining across a 4-day journey. And most importantly, it moved. A fortress that never stayed in one place long enough to be surrounded. I used my entire savings, $14,200 for a first-class sleeper cabin. I packed 1 bag, clothes, medication, a water filter, 2 external hard drives containing every projection model I'd built, and a 9mm handgun I'd purchased legally in Virginia 6 months earlier and never fired. I told no one, not my sister in Philadelphia, not my ex-wife in Denver, not my supervisor, Dr. Alan Roth, who had dismissed Lena's data as a statistical echo. I left a sealed envelope on my kitchen counter with instructions in case someone came looking. Then I drove to Penn Station and boarded the Continental Vault at 4:15 p.m. On a Wednesday. The train was beautiful. Dark mahogany walls, brass fixtures, wide observation windows. The kind of place designed to make you forget the world outside. There were perhaps 90 passengers on board, most of them retirees or couples celebrating anniversaries. A jazz trio was setting up in the lounge car. A woman with silver hair was reading a novel near the window, her reading glasses catching the late afternoon light. I found my cabin. Car 7, Room 4. Set my bag on the bed, locked the door, and opened my laptop. The Istanbul cases had jumped to 11. A new cluster had appeared in Bucharest, and Lena Mozier's phone was now listed as permanently disconnected. The train lurched forward. Penn Station slid away behind us, and I sat in that small, rocking room, watching civilization pass by the window, counting the hours it had left. The first evening aboard was almost cruel in its normalcy. The dining car served pan-seared duck with a blackberry reduction. A couple at the table beside mine, Raymond and Gail, both in their late 60s, told me they were celebrating 40 years of marriage. Raymond had a booming laugh and a habit of touching his wife's hand when he spoke. Gail asked me what I did for a living. I told her I was an analyst. She said, "Oh, numbers," and smiled as if that were the most benign thing in the world. I couldn't eat. The duck sat on my plate, glistening. I moved it around with my fork, nodded at their stories, and excused myself before dessert. Back in my cabin, I connected to the train's satellite Wi-Fi, a slow, expensive connection marketed as a luxury amenity, and pulled the latest data. The Bucharest cluster had tripled. A hospital in Sofia, Bulgaria, had gone dark. And on a CDC internal thread I still had access to, someone had posted a single message. Reclassified to Tbilisi. This is not encephalitis. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Not encephalitis. The word they were avoiding was obvious. The behavioral descriptions in Lena's original field notes. The aggression, the loss of higher cognitive function, the biting, pointed to something that our institutional vocabulary didn't have a comfortable label for. We had clinical terms, we had outbreak classifications, but none of them captured what I had seen in the numbers. This was predatory replication. The pathogen didn't just spread. It converted its hosts into vectors of directed physical violence. I closed the laptop and pressed my forehead against the cold window. We were passing through New Jersey, industrial silhouettes smearing past in the dark. Somewhere out there, in a dozen time zones, people were already changing. And no one with the authority to act was willing to say the word. Around 10 p.m., I walked to the observation car at the rear of the train. The ceiling was glass, curved like a cathedral dome, and the stars above were startlingly clear once we cleared the light pollution of the eastern seaboard. A man sat alone in the far corner nursing a whiskey. He was younger than most passengers, early 30s, lean, with a military-style haircut and watchful eyes. "You don't look like someone on vacation," he said without turning. "Neither do you." He smiled thinly. "Owen Marsh, private security contractor. Or I was, until last week." I sat across from him. "What happened last week?" "Client in Ankara pulled the contract. Didn't say why. Just said the situation on the ground had become non-standard." He swirled his glass. "Ankara's 400 miles from Tbilisi." The fact that he named Tbilisi specifically told me everything. He'd seen something. Maybe not the data I'd seen, but a version of it filtered through the operational lens of a man who made his living in unstable places. "You know what's happening over there," I said. It wasn't a question. Owen looked at me for the first time. His eyes were the color of cold steel. "I know what my contacts in Georgia stopped answering their phones. I know the Turkish military just mobilized a field hospital outside Trabzon that isn't on any official deployment list. And I know that I got on this train for the same reason you did." "Which is?" "Because it moves." We sat in silence for a while. The train rocked gently. Somewhere ahead, the locomotive's horn sounded. A low, mournful note swallowed by the dark. "How long do you think we have?" Owen asked. I thought about lying. I thought about softening it. but there was something in his directness that demanded honesty. If the curve holds, significant domestic cases within 48 hours, infrastructure disruption within 72. After that, it depends on how fast the response collapses. Owen finished his whiskey. It'll collapse fast. It always does. People think systems are strong because they're complicated. But complicated just means more things that can break. He stood, tucked the glass against the window ledge, and offered his hand. I think you and I should keep talking, Marcus. I hadn't told him my name. He saw my expression and shrugged. Passenger manifest is posted in the dining car. I read it before I read the menu. I slept in fragments. The train's rhythm, that steady, metronomic clatter of wheels over rail joints, should have been soothing, but every time I drifted off, I dreamed of graphs. Red lines climbing vertically, dotted projections extending past the edges of the screen. At 3 a.m., I woke fully, drenched in sweat, and checked my phone. No signal. The train had entered a corridor somewhere in rural Pennsylvania where cell towers didn't reach. I dressed and walked to the dining car, hoping for water. The lights were dimmed to a low amber. A woman sat at the bar, her back to me, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea. She turned when she heard my footsteps. She was perhaps 40, dark-skinned with close-cropped natural hair and an expression that mixed exhaustion with alertness. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Not tonight." "I'm Priya Anand, car 5. She gestured to the stool beside her. "I'm a trauma surgeon at Mount Sinai, or I was, until yesterday. I put in for emergency leave after a conversation with a colleague in Doctors Without Borders." I sat down slowly. "What did your colleague say?" Priya rotated the mug between her palms. "She's stationed near the Turkish-Georgian border. She said the patients aren't presenting like any encephalitis she's seen. She said they're restrained to their beds because they keep trying to attack the medical staff. She said 2 nurses have already been bitten and are now showing symptoms." Her voice was clinical, controlled, but her hands trembled slightly against the porcelain. "She told me to leave New York. She said, go somewhere that can't be surrounded." So I thought of the ocean. Then I thought of something faster. The train. Priya nodded. $1,600 I didn't really have, but I figured debt wouldn't matter much if the projections were right. 3 of us now. 3 people who had independently arrived at the same calculus. Mobility as survival. The train as a moving lifeboat. I told Priya about my work at the CDC, about Lena's data, about the curve. She absorbed it without visible shock. Surgeons learn to metabolize horror in real time. She asked precise technical questions. Transmission vectors, incubation windows, post-conversion behavioral characteristics. And I answered as honestly as I could. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "How many people on this train know?" she finally asked. "You, me, and a security contractor named Owen Marsh." "And the other 87 passengers?" "They're celebrating anniversaries and eating duck." Priya almost smiled. It was brief, bitter, and vanished fast. "We need to tell the train staff, the conductor at minimum. If this thing reaches the eastern seaboard while we're still on the rails, we'll need someone with operational authority on our side." She was right, but the prospect filled me with dread. Not because of the conversation itself, but because of what it would set in motion. The moment we told someone in authority, the information would no longer be ours to control. It would spread, and with it, fear. And fear on a sealed train was its own kind of infection. "Tomorrow," I said. "We talk to the conductor first thing, the 3 of us together." Priya agreed. She finished her tea, rinsed the mug in the bar sink, a gesture so domestic it made my chest ache, and walked back toward her car. I stayed at the bar, watching the dark landscape scroll past the windows. Somewhere around 4 a.m., I noticed something through the glass. We were passing through a small town. Just a few buildings clustered near the tracks, a gas station, a church steeple. Most of it was dark, which was normal for that hour. But the gas station's lights were on. And in the parking lot, I could see 3 police cruisers with their light bars flashing. An ambulance sat at an odd angle near the pumps, its rear doors open. And under the fluorescent canopy, I saw 2 figures struggling on the ground. One was in uniform. The other moved in a way that wasn't right. Jerking, lurching, its head snapping forward in sharp, predatory thrusts. The train passed in seconds. The scene vanished behind us like a match dropped in water. But my hands gripped the bar's edge so hard the wood creaked. 48 hours. Maybe I'd been generous. I found Owen at 6 a.m. in the observation car, cleaning a folding knife with a handkerchief. He didn't look like he'd slept. I told him about Priya and about what I'd seen at the gas station. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak until I finished. "One sighting doesn't confirm domestic transmission," he said. "Could have been a bar fight, meth psychosis, dozen explanations." Since when does meth psychosis involve head-snapping lunges at a police officer? Owen folded the knife and slipped it into his jacket. Since when do train passengers carry 9mm handguns in their luggage? Fair point. We found Priya in the dining car, already seated with a pot of black coffee. The morning light through the windows was thin and gray. We'd entered the Allegheny foothills, and clouds had settled low over the ridgelines. The other passengers were beginning to stir. A steward in a crisp white jacket was laying out silverware. The jazz trio's cellist walked past with a yawn, sheet music tucked under his arm. The conductor's name was Harold Fenn, a tall, wiry black man in his late 50s with silver temples and the composed bearing of someone who had managed crises on rails for decades. We found him in the crew car, reviewing a maintenance log with a young technician. He looked up when the 3 of us entered, and something in our collective expression made him set the clipboard down. "Whatever this is," Harold said, "it's before my first cup of coffee, so make it plain." I did. I showed him the CDC data on my laptop. Priya explained the clinical profile: rapid onset neurological degradation, loss of higher cognitive function, extreme aggression, transmission through fluid contact, primarily bites. Owen filled in the operational picture: the Turkish military movements, the communication blackouts, the speed of the spread. Harold listened without interrupting. When we finished, he removed his glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on. "You're asking me to believe that a global pandemic of violent, brain-damaged people is about to hit the United States, and that this train is somehow our best option for survival. I'm asking you to look at the data and draw your own conclusion," I said. Harold looked at the screen. He scrolled slowly through the spreadsheets, the projection curves, the timestamps. He paused on the map. Red clusters now blooming across southeastern Europe, Turkey, and into the Middle East. "My daughter lives in Philadelphia," he said quietly. Then he closed the laptop and straightened. "What do you need from me?" The shift was instant. Harold didn't need persuasion. He needed information. And once he had it, his mind converted it to logistics with military efficiency. Within an hour, he'd gathered the senior crew: the chief steward, Marianne Cho, the head engineer, a burly man named Deckard, and the assistant conductor, a young woman named Yolanda Ruiz. Marianne was skeptical. "This sounds like a movie," she said, arms folded. Movies are based on things people are afraid of, Priya replied. People are afraid of this because it's biologically plausible. Deckard said nothing. He stared at the projection map, his thick fingers resting on the table. Then he asked one question. How much diesel do we have? Enough for 3,200 miles at current speed, Harold answered. More if we reduce to cruising pace. Then we keep moving, Deckard said. We avoid major stations. We refuel at rural depots if we can. And we don't stop unless we absolutely have to. Yolanda raised her hand slightly, as if she were still in school. What do we tell the passengers? The room went silent. This was the question none of us had wanted to face. 90 people in a sealed environment. Retirees, couples, the jazz trio, Raymond and Gail celebrating 40 years. How do you tell people that the world they boarded this train to enjoy is ending? We tell them the truth, Harold said. But we do it carefully, and we do it together. He looked at each of us in turn. This train is now a community, and communities survive or die based on trust. He picked up the intercom handset. I'll make the announcement in 1 hour. Be ready. Harold's announcement came at 8:47 a.m. He stood in the dining car, intercom in hand, and spoke in a voice that was calm, measured, and devastatingly honest. He told the passengers there was a rapidly spreading pathogen overseas that was expected to reach the United States within the next day or two. He described its effects without clinical detail. Severe neurological impairment, violent behavior, transmission through bodily fluid contact. He told them that the train's crew had decided, in consultation with medical and analytical experts on board, to continue the journey along a modified route that would avoid major population centers. He told them the train was well supplied, self-contained, and mobile. He told them they were, in all probability, safer here than anywhere else. The silence after he finished lasted 9 seconds. I counted them. Then the room detonated. A man named Walter Briggs, stocky, red-faced, mid-50s, was the first to stand. This is insane. You're telling me there's some kind of plague and we're supposed to just stay on a train? I have a business in Chicago. I have employees. Raymond, 2 tables away, placed his hand over Gail's. His expression had gone completely flat. A younger woman. I later learned her name was Kira Osei, a graduate student in environmental science. Pulled out her phone and began scrolling. There's nothing on the news, nothing on Twitter, nothing. The suppression is intentional, I said, standing near the bar. Government agencies are managing the information release. They're not ready to confirm. And who are you? Walter demanded. Marcus Vale, 11 years at the CDC. I built the projection models that predicted this. Predicted? So this is a prediction. A guess. It's a mathematical certainty within a defined confidence interval. That's a fancy way of saying guess. Priya stepped forward. I'm Dr. Priya Anand, Trauma Surgery, Mount Sinai Hospital. I've spoken with physicians who are treating patients infected with this pathogen right now. What they describe is consistent with rapid onset neurodegenerative aggression. This is not speculation. The room fractured along predictable lines. About a third of the passengers, mostly the older couples and a few solo travelers, accepted the information with quiet shock. They asked practical questions. How long would the food last? Could we communicate with the outside? What was the plan if someone on board became infected? Another third entered denial. Walter led this faction loudly and persistently. He demanded the train stop at the next station. He threatened legal action. He called Harold a fear-mongering bureaucrat, apparently not registering the irony of calling a train conductor a bureaucrat. The final third simply froze. They sat in their seats, eyes unfocused, processing. Among them was a teenage girl named Sophie, traveling with her mother, Elena. Sophie stared out the window with an expression I recognized, the look of someone whose understanding of reality had just been cleanly severed. Owen positioned himself near the rear exit of the dining car, arms crossed, watching the crowd with the detached assessment of a man who had managed volatile situations before. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. Not approval exactly, acknowledgement. Harold handled the descent with extraordinary patience. He told Walter he understood his frustration. He told Kira he welcomed her skepticism and encouraged her to verify the information through any channels she could access. He told every passenger that no one was being held against their will if the train stopped for any operational reason. Anyone who wished to leave would be free to do so. But I'm asking you to consider, he said, that the safest place you can be right now is a place that keeps moving. A place with food, water, shelter, and people who are prepared. That's this train. Walter sat down. He wasn't convinced, but the wind had left him. I walked to Sophie and Elena's table. Elena was gripping her daughter's hand. Sophie looked up at me with dark, steady eyes that seemed older than her years. "Is it really happening?" she asked. I crouched beside her. "Yes, but we have a plan, and you're not alone," was the first promise I made on that train. It would not be the last I struggled to keep. By noon, the train had passed through Pittsburgh without stopping. Harold had radioed ahead to reroute us along a freight corridor that bypassed the main station. Through the windows, the city looked normal. Traffic moving, pedestrians on bridges, the skyline indifferent under a pale sun. But Priya, monitoring a medical forum on her phone through the intermittent Wi-Fi, showed me a post from a Pittsburgh ER physician, time-stamped 40 minutes earlier. 3 patients admitted with bite wounds presenting identical neurological symptoms. Security called. 1 patient broke restraints. 3 in Pittsburgh already. The geographical math was devastating. If domestic cases were appearing in Pittsburgh, then the eastern seaboard was likely already compromised at a level the data hadn't reached me yet. The pathogen had moved faster than the models predicted. Or, and this thought hollowed me out, it had been here longer than anyone realized. And the Caucasus cluster was just where it had first been identified, not where it had first arrived. Owen organized the first security assessment after lunch. He walked every car, checked every door mechanism, cataloged every potential entry and exit point. The Continental Vault had been designed for comfort, not defense. The doors between cars were heavy, but not lockable from inside. The exterior doors used electronic latches that could be overridden manually. The windows were double-paned tempered glass, strong but not indestructible. "We have 16 cars," Owen reported to our small group, now gathered in Harold's crew compartment. "Locomotive and fuel at the front. 3 sleeper cars, 2 standard seating cars, dining car, observation car, lounge car, kitchen and supply car, crew quarters, baggage car, and 4 service cars. Maintenance, water recycling, generator, and storage. We can isolate sections by decoupling cars if necessary, but that's a one-way decision." "Decoupling?" Priya said. "Detaching a car from the train. If someone on board turns and we can't contain them, we seal the car and release it. The train keeps moving. The compromised car stays behind." The room absorbed this in heavy silence. "That means leaving people," Marianne said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "That means keeping everyone else alive," Owen replied. There was no cruelty in his tone, just the arithmetic of triage. Harold assigned roles. Owen would oversee physical security. Priya would establish a medical station in the crew compartment, using supplies from the train's first aid stores and whatever she could improvise. I would continue monitoring the data, tracking the spread, predicting the pathogen's approach vector, estimating how long our route would remain viable. Marianne would manage the passengers. Meals, communication, morale. Deckard would keep the train running. Yolanda volunteered for something none of us had asked for. "I'll watch the passenger cars at night," she said. "If someone starts showing symptoms, fever, confusion, aggression, we need to know immediately." Harold looked at her for a long moment. She was 26 years old. Her hands were steady. "Take Owen with you for the first round," he said. "Nobody patrols alone." By 3 p.m., the first confirmed reports hit mainstream American news. CNN ran a crawl. CDC investigating unusual disease cluster in multiple U.S. cities. Within the hour, the language escalated. Patients displaying extreme violent behavior. Then, hospitals in Boston, Philadelphia, and Atlanta report overwhelmed emergency departments. Kira found me in my cabin. She held her phone like it was a grenade. "You were right," she said. "It's everywhere." I looked at the screen. Social media was erupting. Shaky videos from parking lots, stairwells, subway stations. Figures lunging, screaming. The terrible wet sound of something that used to be human doing things that human bodies were never meant to do. "How did you know before everyone else?" Kira asked. "I didn't know. I read the data and followed it to its conclusion. Anyone at the CDC could have done the same. But they didn't. No, they didn't." Kira sat on the edge of my bed, her shoulders curling inward. She was 23 years old and had been traveling to a research station in Wisconsin. That research station no longer mattered. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We keep moving," I said. "And we stay human." It sounded simple. It wouldn't be. The first night after the announcement was the longest of my life. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. The train moved through the darkness of rural Ohio, and the world outside the windows was black and formless. No towns, no lights. Just the ancient, indifferent landscape sliding past, while 93 souls rocked in their berths, each one recalculating the value of everything they'd left behind. I couldn't stay in my cabin. The walls felt like they were compressing. I walked the length of the train, car by car, listening to the sounds of a community in the first stages of collective grief. In car 3, someone was crying. Soft, muffled sobs absorbed by a pillow. In the lounge car, Raymond sat alone, his hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing. Gail was asleep in their cabin, he told me. She'd taken a sedative from Priya's medical station. He didn't want one. He wanted to stay awake. "I was in Korea," he said. 1972. Supply corps, not combat. But I saw what panic does to a unit. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts with one person breaking, and then it moves through the group like water through a crack. Are you worried about that happening here? I'm worried it's already started. Walter Briggs has been talking to people, telling them Harold is overreacting, telling them we should force a stop at the next station. I sat beside him. Walter is scared. Scared people look for someone to blame. Scared people also do stupid things. And stupid things in a sealed tube moving at 60 miles an hour can kill everyone. Raymond's calm was the kind that comes from having survived one catastrophe and carrying the scar tissue into every subsequent crisis. He wasn't panicking because he had already exhausted his capacity for panic decades ago. What remained was a clear-eyed pragmatism that I found deeply stabilizing. "I'll talk to Harold," I said. We need to give people agency, tasks, responsibilities. Idle fear metastasizes. Raymond nodded. My wife is a retired school teacher. She's good with people when she's not sedated. Let her organize something. Activities, routines, structure. It was a small suggestion. It would prove essential. By dawn, Priya reported the first medical concern unrelated to the pathogen. An elderly man in car 2, Bernard Hale, 78, was experiencing chest pains. She examined him in the makeshift medical bay and determined it was angina, exacerbated by stress. She stabilized him with nitroglycerin tablets from the first aid kit, but pulled me aside afterward. I have limited supplies, Marcus. If someone has a genuine medical emergency, a heart attack, a stroke, a compound fracture, I can't do what I do in a hospital. I can manage symptoms. I can't perform surgery in a rocking train with a suture kit designed for minor lacerations. What do you need? Time, and for nothing else to go wrong. She paused, which is another way of saying I need a miracle. At 7:15 a.m., Owen intercepted me between cars. His face was tight. We have a problem. The engineer just told me we're approaching Elkhart, Indiana. Major rail junction. If the switch hasn't been set for our bypass route, we'll be diverted into the city station. Can we contact someone to set it? Harold's been trying. No response from the Elkhart dispatch office. We went to the locomotive cab, where Deckard sat at the controls, his massive frame hunched over the instrument panel. Through the windshield, the track stretched ahead in a gray line, converging toward a junction signal that was blinking amber. Amber means the switch is in default position, Deckard said. Default routes us through the station. Can you override it? I can reduce speed and stop before the junction. Then someone has to get out and manually throw the switch. Get out. The two words hung in the air like smoke. Since the announcement, the world outside the train had become an abstraction, a scrolling backdrop of danger we observed but never touched. Now someone would have to step into it. Owen rolled his shoulders. I'll do it. Not alone, I said. He looked at me. You ever thrown a rail switch? No, but I can watch your back. The train slowed to a crawl as we approached the Elkhart junction. Deckard brought us to a stop 200 yards from the switch point, the locomotive idling with a low, persistent growl. Through the windows, the junction area was visible. A wide, flat expanse of interlocking tracks, a small switching station building with a corrugated metal roof. And beyond it, the outskirts of Elkhart. Strip malls, parking lots, a water tower painted with the city's name in blocky letters. Everything looked still. That was the problem. It was 7:30 on a Thursday morning, and nothing was moving. No cars on the nearby road. No workers at the switching station. No trains on the adjacent tracks. The world looked like a photograph. All surface, no life behind it. Owen and I stood at the exterior door of the locomotive car. He had his knife. I had my handgun, which felt absurd and inadequate in my hand. Priya had given us each a pair of nitrile gloves. If this pathogen transmits through fluid contact, you don't touch anything organic without a barrier. We go straight to the switch box, Owen said. It's a manual lever, usually painted yellow, mounted on a concrete pad beside the tracks. I'll throw it. You stand 10 feet back and watch every direction. If something moves toward us that doesn't look right, you shout. If it gets within 20 feet, you fire. Understood? Understood. Harold's voice came over the internal radio clipped to Owen's belt. Deckard will keep the engine running. The moment you throw the switch and return, we move. Don't linger. Owen opened the door. The morning air hit us, cold, damp, smelling of diesel and wet earth. We dropped to the gravel beside the tracks. The sound of our footsteps seemed obscenely loud. Every crunch of stone under our boots was a broadcast signal to anything listening. We moved quickly. Owen walked with the efficient, gliding gait of someone trained to cross hostile terrain. I moved beside him, my eyes sweeping the switching station, the road, the parking lot of a darkened Arby's beyond the tracks. The switch lever was exactly where Owen said it would be. A yellow-handled mechanism bolted to a concrete base between the rails. Owen crouched, gripped it, and pulled. It resisted. He pulled harder. Metal groaned. The lever moved, and somewhere beneath the rails, heavy iron components shifted with a resonant clank. "Done," he said. "Let's go." We turned back toward the train, and that's when I saw movement at the switching station. The door of the small building was open. I hadn't noticed before, or it had been closed and something had pushed it. A figure stood in the doorway. A man in a railroad worker's uniform, gray coveralls, orange safety vest. He was standing at an angle, his body canted to one side, as if his sense of balance had been impaired. His head moved in small, twitching rotations, scanning the area the way a bird of prey tracks movement on the ground. "Owen," I whispered. He saw it. His hand went to his knife. We were 50 feet from the train. The man in the doorway was perhaps 40 feet from us, perpendicular to our path. "Walk, don't run," Owen said. "Running triggers pursuit behavior in predatory organisms. Steady pace, eyes forward." We walked. My legs screamed to sprint. Every synapse in my brain fired chemical alarms, demanding acceleration. But Owen's voice had the authority of experience, and I obeyed it. The man in the doorway turned his head toward us. His mouth opened, and a sound came out. Not speech, not a groan, but something between the two. A wet, aspirated vocalization that rose in pitch as his body oriented in our direction. 20 feet from the train. The locomotive door was open. Deckard's enormous hand was extended, reaching for us. The man took a step forward, then another. His gait was wrong. Too fast for walking, too disjointed for running. A stuttering, mechanical acceleration that closed distance with sickening efficiency. Owen pushed me toward the door. Deckard grabbed my arm and hauled me up. Owen swung in behind me. Deckard slammed the door. The man reached the side of the locomotive 2 seconds later. We heard him impact the metal. A flat, boneless thud. And then the scraping of fingernails against steel. "Go," Owen said. Deckard opened the throttle. The train surged forward. Nobody spoke for a long time after we cleared Elkhart. Owen sat on the floor of the locomotive cab, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. I stood at the instrument panel beside Deckard, watching the tracks unwind ahead of us as we accelerated through Indiana farmland. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from cold, from the memory of that sound. The vocalization, the scraping, the terrible efficiency of approach. I had read the data. I had modeled the spread. I had briefed the crew with clinical language and statistical projections. But nothing in the numbers had prepared me for the reality of seeing a human being reduced to something driven by a single predatory impulse. The railroad worker hadn't been dead. His eyes had tracked us with active awareness. But whatever had once been conscious in him, memories, language, judgment, fear, had been overwritten by something older and simpler. Something that only knew how to approach and consume. When I returned to the passenger cars, word had already spread about the stop. Sophie was the one who asked directly, "Did you see one?" I nodded. "What was it like?" fast and wrong. She processed this with the same unsettling composure she'd shown since the announcement. Her mother, Elena, was not handling things as well. Elena had developed a persistent tremor in her left hand and had stopped eating. Priya was monitoring her. By midday, the news channels that were still broadcasting had abandoned all pretense of measured reporting. Footage from major cities showed scenes of comprehensive collapse. Highways gridlocked. National Guard units deployed and immediately overwhelmed. Hospitals barricaded from the inside, and everywhere, the infected. Moving in groups now, drawn by sound and motion, converging on populated areas with the blind persistence of floodwater seeking a low point. Walter Briggs watched the coverage on his tablet in the lounge car. When I walked past, he stopped me. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice had lost its combative edge. In its place was something fragile, the sound of a man whose certainty had been surgically removed. "You don't owe me anything. You were scared. We all were. I have a daughter. She lives in Chicago." He looked at his hands. "She's not answering her phone." I sat beside him. There was nothing I could say that would help. No data point, no projection, no probability estimate that would give him what he needed. So I sat with him in the silence and let the weight of it rest between us. Sometimes presence is the only medicine that matters. That afternoon, Gail, Raymond's wife, now fully alert and apparently indestructible, organized the first community meeting in the dining car. She stood at the front with the natural authority of a woman who had spent 35 years commanding classrooms, and called the room to order by simply raising one hand. "We are not going to fall apart," she said. "We are going to organize. We are going to help each other. And we are going to treat every person on this train with dignity and respect, because the moment we stop doing that, we've lost more than the world outside has taken from us." She assigned teams, kitchen duty rotations, cleaning shifts, a childcare group for Sophie and 3 younger children on board, a communications team led by Kira, whose technical skills proved invaluable in maintaining the satellite connection, and a wellness check team that would visit every cabin twice daily to ensure no one was alone, no one was deteriorating, and no one had been forgotten. It was, in retrospect, the single most important thing anyone did on that train. Not Owen's security protocols, not my data analysis, not even Harold's operational decisions. It was Gail, a 70-year-old retired teacher, standing in a dining car and insisting that civilization was a choice and that we were going to keep making it. Owen leaned against the wall during the meeting, watching Gail with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Respect, certainly, but something else, a kind of wonder, as if he'd spent his career preparing for the worst in humanity and was now witnessing something he hadn't modeled for. The train pushed westward. The sun arced across a sky that looked exactly as it always had. And inside our moving world, strangers became a society. The crisis came on the second night, and it came from inside. At 11:40 p.m., Yolanda's voice crackled over the crew radio. "Medical emergency, car 4, cabin 6. Passenger is running a high fever and becoming combative. I need Priya here now." I was in the crew compartment reviewing route options with Harold when the call came. We both froze. The word combative detonated between us like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Priya grabbed her medical bag. Owen materialized from the corridor, knife in hand. The 4 of us moved toward car 4 in a tight formation, the rocking of the train making our steps uneven. Harold had a fire extinguisher, the closest thing to a defensive tool he could find that wasn't a weapon. Cabin 6 belonged to a man named Douglas Fern, 52, traveling alone, hadn't spoken to anyone since the announcement. He'd taken his meals in his room. Yolanda had flagged him during her evening checks. Elevated temperature, disorientation, slurred speech. But he'd refused examination. We could hear him before we reached the cabin. A guttural, rhythmic moaning that pressed against the closed door like a physical force. Yolanda stood outside, her back against the opposite wall. Her eyes wide, but her posture controlled. "He started shaking about 20 minutes ago," she said. "Then the fever spiked. He grabbed my wrist when I tried to take his temperature. His grip it wasn't normal. It was like being caught in a machine." Owen moved to the door. "Douglas, my name is Owen. We have a doctor here. We want to help you." The moaning stopped. The silence was worse. Then the door shuddered. Something hit it from inside. Not a knock, but a full body impact that cracked the wood along the frame. A second impact. A third. Each one drove the door outward against its lock by a quarter inch. "Back," Owen said. "Everyone back." We retreated down the corridor. Owen positioned himself between us and the cabin, his knife low. Priya was counting seconds under her breath, a clinical habit, timing the interval between episodes. "We need to know," she said. "Is this the pathogen, or is this a medical event? Fever and aggression could be meningitis, a seizure disorder, an acute psychotic break. I can't make a diagnosis through a door." "And if it is the pathogen?" Owen asked. Priya didn't answer. She didn't have to. We all knew the protocol we'd discussed in theory, but prayed we'd never implement. Isolate, seal. And if the car couldn't be sealed, decouple. Harold made the call. "We isolate this car. Move the other passengers in car 4 to car 3 and car 5. Close the connecting doors on both sides. Nobody enters until we know what we're dealing with." We executed the evacuation in 12 minutes. The passengers in car 4, 6 people, including a couple from Montreal, were relocated with minimal panic, largely because Gail appeared in the corridor and escorted them personally, speaking in a low, steady voice about temporary arrangements and fresh blankets. Owen sealed the connecting doors using maintenance straps. From the supply car, heavy nylon webbing rated for cargo restraint, looped through the door handles and cinched tight. It wasn't elegant, but it would hold against anything short of a battering ram. We stood in the corridor of car 3, listening. Through the sealed door, from the isolated car beyond, we could hear Douglas. The moaning had returned, but it had changed. Lower, more sustained, punctuated by bursts of frantic scrabbling against walls, floor, ceiling. The sounds of a creature testing the boundaries of its cage. Priya pulled me aside. Her face was ashen. I checked the passenger manifest. Douglas Fern boarded in New York. If he was infected before he got on this train, his incubation period is over 48 hours. That's within the range Lena's data described. Meaning he could have been carrying it since departure. Meaning anyone he breathed on, touched, or shared a surface with could be in the incubation window right now. The train rocked onward through the dark. And the thing that had been Douglas Fern threw itself against the walls of its sealed car with the patience of something that would never tire. Dawn brought no comfort. The sounds from car 4 had subsided to an intermittent scratching, monotonous, deliberate, like the ticking of a malevolent clock. Passengers who slept in adjacent cars reported nightmares. Children woke crying. The atmosphere on the train had shifted from anxious solidarity to something thinner and more brittle. A communal awareness that the danger was no longer exclusively outside. Priya instituted immediate medical screenings. Every passenger and crew member lined up in the dining car, while she checked temperatures, pupil response, and skin coloration. She was thorough, methodical, and gentle. She explained each step. She made eye contact. She treated every person as a patient, not a potential threat. It was a masterful performance of calm authority that cost her something visible. By the time she finished the last passenger, her hands were shaking. And she locked herself in the crew compartment for 10 minutes before emerging with red eyes and restored composure. 3 passengers showed mildly elevated temperatures. One was Bernard Hale, the elderly man with angina, whose fever was attributable to his existing condition. The second was a woman named Dolores, 71, whose temperature of 99.3 was consistent with the mild cold she'd been nursing since boarding. The third was a young man named Jin Park, 28, a software engineer traveling to a conference in Wisconsin that would never happen. Jin's temperature was 100.4. He had no other symptoms. He was alert, oriented, and conversational. He showed no signs of aggression, confusion, or neurological impairment. But Priya pulled me and Owen into the crew compartment and closed the door. 100.4 is borderline. It could be stress. It could be a common virus. It could be early-stage incubation. She pressed her palms against her temples. I have no test for this pathogen. I can't distinguish it from a cold until behavioral symptoms manifest, and by then it may be too late to contain. Owen's solution was immediate. Quarantine, separate cabin, monitored around the clock. If he escalates, we treat him the same as Douglas. He's a human being, Owen, not a variable. I know that. But so are the 90 other people on this train. I found Jin in the dining car. He was sitting alone, his laptop open, staring at a code editor he hadn't typed in. He looked up when I approached, and I saw that he already knew. It's about my temperature, isn't it? We need to take precautions. It's probably nothing. But Dr. Anand wants to monitor you in a separate cabin. Jin closed his laptop. For how long? 24 hours. If your temperature normalizes and you show no other symptoms, you're clear. He studied me. Jin was perceptive in the way that quiet people often are. He absorbed social dynamics through observation rather than participation. And what he saw in my face told him more than my words did. You're scared. It's not just a fever, he said. I'm scared of everything right now. That doesn't change the protocol. He went voluntarily. He walked to the designated quarantine cabin in car 6 with his laptop under his arm and a dignity that tightened something in my chest. Yolanda stationed herself outside his door. She brought him tea. They talked through the closed door about video games and Korean cinema and the absurdity of their situation. Her warmth was not strategic. It was who she was. And it kept Jin tethered to his humanity during the longest 24 hours of his life. Meanwhile, the world outside continued to dissolve. The satellite Wi-Fi connection had become intermittent. But the fragments we received were sufficient to construct the picture. The eastern seaboard had essentially collapsed. Major cities were classified as non-recoverable by FEMA, a designation I'd never seen used before. The military was establishing perimeter zones around strategic infrastructure, abandoning urban centers to concentrate on supply depots, airfields, and government continuity sites. Harold studied the maps in the crew compartment. Our route had taken us through Indiana and into Illinois, avoiding Chicago by swinging north toward the Wisconsin border. We need to decide, he said. Do we cross into Canada, or do we stay on American rails? The answer would define everything that followed. The vote happened that evening. Harold insisted on democracy. This train doesn't have a dictator. It has passengers with equal stakes. Every adult was given a voice. The question was simple. Attempt a border crossing into Canada, where reports suggested the outbreak had arrived but was less advanced, or remain on American rails, moving through the rural Midwest, where population density was lower but infrastructure was less certain. Owen argued for Canada. The U.S. grid is collapsing. Power, communications, rail switching. Everything runs through centralized systems that are failing. Canada's rail network is smaller but more decentralized, and the population density in northern Ontario is close to zero. We could run for hundreds of miles without seeing another soul. Priya argued for staying. We don't know the situation at the border. If it's militarized, we could be stopped, searched, and quarantined in a fixed location. Everything we've built on this train, the mobility, the self-sufficiency, depends on not being trapped. Raymond spoke from the back of the dining car. My wife and I have talked about this. We're old. We've had our lives. Whatever decision this group makes, we support it. But I'll say this. Fixed positions get overrun. Moving targets survive. That's not philosophy. That's Incheon, 1950. Kira had managed to reach a ham radio operator in northern Michigan through a jury-rigged antenna she'd built from the train's communication equipment and a length of copper wire from the maintenance car. The operator, a man who identified himself only as Bird Dog, reported that the Sault Ste. Marie border crossing was closed. The Canadian military had established checkpoints along the major road and rail corridors, but that the secondary rail lines through the forest regions were unmonitored. They can't patrol everything, Kira reported. The rail line through Sudbury connects to a northern corridor that runs all the way to Hearst, Ontario. It's logging territory. No major population centers for 300 miles. Walter stood. He'd been quiet since our conversation about his daughter. His face had aged a decade in 2 days. I vote we go north. My daughter... His voice cracked. He swallowed. My daughter would want me to keep going. She'd want me to find somewhere safe and wait. The vote was 67-19 in favor of crossing into Canada, with 7 abstentions. Harold recorded it formally in the train's log, a gesture that seemed quaint and monumental at the same time. Documenting democracy in the middle of collapse, Deckard plotted the route. We would swing east through Michigan's Upper Peninsula, cross the border on a secondary rail line near a defunct copper mine, and join the Canadian Northern Corridor heading west. Fuel would be our limiting factor. We had approximately 1,800 miles of diesel remaining, and the northern route was long and cold. We may need to stop for fuel, Deckard said. There are rural depots along the Canadian lines. Some might still be operational. And some might be overrun, Owen added. Everything might be overrun. That's the world we're in now. That night, I checked on Jin. Yolanda reported his temperature had dropped to 99.1. He was eating, sleeping, and had beaten her at 3 rounds of verbal chess played through the door. No behavioral changes, no aggression, no confusion. Priya examined him at midnight. She emerged from the quarantine cabin with the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from her. It's a cold. Just a cold. The relief that moved through the train when the announcement was made felt physical, a collective exhale that fogged the windows. Jin walked into the dining car to quiet applause. Gail hugged him. Sophie high-fived him. Even Owen nodded in his direction. But the celebration was brief, because while we'd been focused on Jin, the sounds from car 4 had changed again. Douglas had been silent for 6 hours. No scratching, no moaning, no impacts against the walls. And then Yolanda reported what she'd seen through the narrow window in the sealed connecting door. The cabin door inside car 4 was open. Douglas was standing in the corridor, motionless, facing our direction, waiting. Harold made the decision to decouple Car 4 at 3:17 a.m. It was not a decision made lightly, and it was not made alone. He gathered the crew and our core group in the locomotive cab, and he laid it out with the precision of a man who had spent a career making operational judgments in high-consequence environments. Car 4 is compromised. The infected passenger is mobile and has exited his cabin. We cannot risk him breaching the sealed connecting doors. The car contains no other passengers and no essential supplies. Decoupling is the safest option for everyone aboard. Owen described the mechanical process. The coupling mechanism between cars was a standard association of American Railroads design. A semi-automatic coupler that could be disengaged manually using a lever on the exterior undercarriage. Someone would have to go between the cars, underneath the connection, and pull the release. "I'll do it," Deckard said. "I know the mechanism, and I'm the only one strong enough to pull that lever in cold weather. The grease freezes and the mechanism stiffens. You'll be between a sealed car with an infected individual inside and a moving train," Priya said. "If anything goes wrong, then I die doing my job instead of waiting around for someone else to do it." There was no argument that could counter that. Deckard was not a man who invited debate about his own capabilities. We slowed the train to 5 miles per hour. Deckard climbed down through the forward connecting platform of Car 5, wearing heavy gloves and a headlamp. Owen went with him, positioned on the platform above, watching the sealed door of Car 4 through its narrow window. Harold kept the radio open. The rest of us waited in the corridor of Car 5, listening to the metallic sounds of Deckard working beneath us. The radio crackled. Owen's voice. "He's moving. The infected is moving toward the connecting door. He can hear us." "Deckard, status?" Harold said. "Coupling lever is frozen. Working on it." Through the sealed door, we could hear it now. Footsteps in Car 4, not the shuffling gait we'd heard in Elkhart. This was faster, more purposeful. Douglas had been infected for over 48 hours, and whatever the pathogen was doing to his nervous system, it wasn't slowing him down. It was refining him. A thud against the connecting door. Then another. The nylon straps we'd rigged strained visibly, the webbing stretching under force I hadn't thought a single human body could generate. "Deckard!" Harold shouted into the radio. A metallic clang from beneath us. Then the sound of heavy iron disengaging. A deep, resonant clunk that vibrated through the floor. "Coupling released," Deckard's voice said. "Pull me up." Owen reached down. Deckard's hand appeared. Massive, grease-blackened, trembling with cold and exertion. Owen hauled him up with a grunt. Harold radioed the cab. "Throttle up, now." The train accelerated. Slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Through the rear window of Car 5, we watched Car 4 fall behind. A dark rectangle receding into the night, its windows unlit. A single shape visible in the connecting door window, pressing against the glass. Douglas Fern had been a person. He had boarded this train with a ticket and a suitcase, and whatever private reasons people have for traveling. He had sat in his cabin and eaten meals delivered by a steward. He had existed as a complete human being with a history and a name. And now he was standing in an abandoned rail car on a frozen track in the Michigan wilderness, reduced to an appetite wrapped in failing flesh. I didn't watch until the car disappeared. I couldn't. I turned and walked to the dining car, where Gail had quietly organized hot chocolate for anyone who was awake. Most of the train was. They sat in clusters, hands wrapped around warm mugs, speaking in low voices or not speaking at all. Sophie found me. She sat beside me without a word and leaned her head against my arm. She was 15 years old and had just watched an abandoned rail car vanish into the darkness, with a human being sealed inside. put my arm around her and stared at the black window and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. We crossed the border at 6:22 a.m. There was no checkpoint, no military presence, no indication that anyone was monitoring the decrepit rail line that wound through frozen forest near the defunct Quincy mine. The rails were rusted and narrow, and Deckard reduced speed to 15 miles per hour to prevent a derailment. The train crept through the border zone like a steel serpent navigating a mountain pass, every wheel strike echoing through the ancient trees. Canada looked the same as Michigan, vast, cold, silent. But the silence here felt different. Michigan's silence had been the absence of something that should have been there. Northern Ontario's silence was original. This land had been quiet for 10,000 years. The pathogen hadn't arrived here because there was nothing here for it to find. The first 12 hours on Canadian rails were the calmest period since we'd left New York. The tension didn't evaporate. It settled, like sediment in disturbed water, leaving a strange clarity. People began to move differently. They sat in the observation car and watched the boreal forest glide past. They talked about things other than the outbreak, memories, jokes, the small absurdities of life before. Marianne organized a dinner service that used the last of the fresh ingredients with extraordinary creativity. The jazz trio played for the first time since the announcement, a set of standards that filled the dining car with melodies so beautiful they became a form of grief. Owen and I stood in the vestibule between cars, both set, sharing a silence that had become comfortable over the preceding days. "I keep thinking about the switching station in Elkhart," he said. "That worker, he was wearing his uniform, his safety vest. He got up that morning and went to work, and somewhere between clocking in and the end of his shift, he stopped being a person. Does that change how you think about all of this? It makes me think about how thin it is. The layer between who we are and what we could become. Every decision on this train, the vote, the quarantine, the decoupling, those are choices. We choose to stay human, but we're choosing against a pressure that doesn't negotiate." It was the most philosophical thing Owen had ever said. He seemed surprised by it himself, and deflected by checking his knife, a habit I'd come to recognize as his version of fidgeting. At 4 p.m., Kira made contact with Bird Dog again. The ham radio operator sounded exhausted. He reported that the Northern Ontario corridor was clear of infected, no population centers, no incidents. But he warned that the rail depot at Chapleau, where we'd planned to refuel, had been abandoned. Its fuel reserves were still intact, as far as he knew. But there was no one to operate the pumping equipment. "Deckard can figure it out," Harold said with a confidence that the engineer's grunt neither confirmed nor denied. We reached Chapleau at dusk. The depot was a small, weathered facility surrounded by birch forest, its fuel tanks painted a fading industrial green. Deckard, Owen, and Yolanda went out the first time we'd opened the doors since Elkhart. They moved quickly and with purpose. Deckard located the manual pump and connected it to the locomotive's fuel intake. Owen established a perimeter. Yolanda watched the tree line. It took 90 minutes, the longest 90 minutes of collective breath-holding I'd ever experienced. Passengers pressed against the windows, watching three figures work in the failing light of a subarctic evening. No infected appeared. No sounds disturbed the forest. Only the rhythmic clank of the manual pump and the distant call of a loon across an unseen lake. When they returned, Deckard reported a full fuel load. 3,200 miles of range restored. The train could run for days without stopping. Harold unfolded a map on the dining car table. The Canadian Northern Corridor stretched westward. Hearst, Long Lac, Thunder Bay, and beyond. Thousands of miles of trek through one of the emptiest landscapes on the continent. "We have fuel," Harold said. "We have food for 2 weeks. We have each other." He looked around the table. We keep moving. The train pushed west into the boreal night, and for the first time in 4 days, I allowed myself to believe that survival was not just possible, but present. I'm writing this in the observation car, 6 days after we left New York. The stars above northern Ontario are impossibly dense, a white river of light that makes the sky feel like something alive and indifferent and permanent. The train rocks beneath me with a rhythm I've absorbed into my body. It's become my heartbeat, my breath, the metronome of this strange new existence. We are 92 people on a train that moves through silence. We are not safe. We are not rescued. We are simply continuing a decision made fresh every morning when Deckard opens the throttle and the rails sing beneath us. I was a man who read patterns in numbers. Now I read them in faces, in Gail's unwavering command, in Owen's careful vigilance, in Priya's steady hands, in Sophie's quiet strength, more durable than anyone her age should need to possess. The world behind us is broken. The world ahead is unknown. But this train, this improbable, rocking, diesel-burning cathedral of strangers, has become something I never expected to find at the end of civilization. A beginning. My name is Marcus Vale. We are still moving, and I am still human. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell button. Thank you.